The chow line stretched across the yard, boots grinding into the sun-baked dirt of Camp Hawthorne. The heat made tempers short, and jokes cut sharper than usual. Private First Class Emily Parker stood in line like everyone else, sleeves rolled just above the wrist. That was all it took. The butterfly tattoo on her forearm caught the eye of a group of infantry soldiers behind her. One smirked loud enough for the others to hear. "What's she gonna do, flutter at the enemy?" Laughter broke out, a ripple of amusement at her expense. Emily didn't flinch. She didn't turn. She just kept her eyes forward, tray steady in her hands. Silence, her only defense. They thought they knew who she was. They didn't. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from today. Private First Class Emily Parker was 28 years old, assigned to the Logistics Division at Camp Hawthorne. Her world wasn't firefights or night raids, it was clipboards, manifests, and endless stacks of supply reports. While others trained for combat, she made sure they had the gear to survive it. Every morning she arrived early, boots polished to a mirror shine. Her bunk was squared away, paperwork flawless. She never raised her voice, never complained, never cut corners. If a shipment was missing, Emily found it. If her report was late, Emily had already finished it the night before. But in the eyes of most infantrymen, none of that mattered. To them, she wasn't a fighter, wasn't real army. She was just another supply clerk, someone they didn't picture in the field, someone whose quiet presence could be overlooked without a second thought. The contrast was sharp. The men who mocked her were loud, brash, convinced that worth was measured in calluses and combat patches. Emily was the opposite. Soft-spoken, steady, humble. She didn't brag about past accomplishments. She didn't push back when jokes were thrown her way. She simply endured them. And then there was the tattoo. A single butterfly, black ink spread across the pale skin of her forearm. To most, it looked like something out of place on a soldier. Feminine, fragile, a decoration that didn't belong beside a uniform and dog tags. In the chow hall, whispers always started when someone noticed it. "She get that on spring break?" someone would mutter. "What's she gonna do, flap her wings at the Taliban?" The laughter that followed never seemed to touch her. Emily never explained, not once. She kept her sleeves rolled just high enough that the ink was always visible. Whether it was stubbornness, pride, or something else entirely, no one knew. But she never defended it, never offered a story, never gave them what they wanted. To her fellow soldiers, it was a joke. To Emily Parker, it was something else entirely. The first time it happened in front of a formation, Emily told herself it didn't matter. They were standing in the yard for a routine briefing when a platoon sergeant caught sight of her tattoo. He smirked, then turned to the entire group. "Look at this," he said, grabbing her wrist and holding it up for everyone to see. "Private Parker here thinks she's at a butterfly garden. What's this supposed to be, Parker? Your spirit animal?" A ripple of laughter moved through the ranks. Emily didn't pull her arm back. She just let the silence sit, eyes locked forward, jaw tight. The sergeant eventually dropped her wrist and moved on, but the damage lingered. To everyone watching, she was fair game. It spread to the motor pool. One hot afternoon, two soldiers leaned against a Humvee, cigarettes dangling from their lips, watching her walk past with a clipboard. "I'll put 20 on it," one said loud enough for her to hear. "She couldn't even load this truck without breaking a nail." The other chuckled. "You're on. No way she even knows where the tie-down points are." Emily kept walking. She didn't flinch, didn't fire back. But in the reflection of the Humvee's side mirror, her eyes burned for just a moment before softening again. She disappeared into the warehouse, and the laughter followed her. It got worse in the chow hall. She balanced her tray, careful as always, when a private brushed past too close. The tray slipped. Metal clattered against the floor. Food scattered across the tiles. The hall erupted. Some jeered. One clapped sarcastically. "Nice work, Parker. Enemy's gonna surrender now for sure." Emily knelt, picking up the pieces one by one. No curse words, no anger. Just steady hands, slow breaths, and silence. A medic bent down to help her, but she shook her head. She didn't want pity. She finished cleaning, left her tray behind, and sat at a corner table alone. That became her routine. Alone at meals, alone at the supply desk long after others had gone to their bunks. The lights in her office burned late, her pen scratching across paper. When soldiers passed by, they saw her hunched over letters sealed in neat stacks, but never mailed. No one knew who she wrote. No one asked. The silence might have swallowed her whole, if not for the visiting unit. One afternoon, a convoy rolled through Camp Hawthorne, dust clouds trailing the arrival of a Navy SEAL detachment rotating through for joint training. Hardened men stepped off the vehicles, weapons slung, eyes scanning. They noticed everything, and when they noticed Emily Parker being mocked at the edge of the yard, when they saw the way laughter followed her like a shadow, they didn't laugh. They just watched, studied. Something about her, something about that ink on her forearm, caught the attention of a group of infantry soldiers behind her. They didn't say a word, not yet, but from that moment on, Emily wasn't just invisible. She was being observed. The days blurred into one another at Camp Hawthorne. For most, it was routine. For Emily Parker, it was a test of endurance, not of combat, but of silence. Yet every now and then, cracks in the image she presented would show. Little things, subtle, but impossible to ignore if someone paid close attention.
The first clue appeared one evening when a private walked past the women's barracks. Emily's locker door was open, a single photo taped inside. At first glance, it looked ordinary, a group of soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder in the desert. But the faces were blurred, either by dust or deliberate smudging. Only one detail stood out: a patch on a sleeve half covered, but distinct to anyone who knew special operations. The private lingered, squinting, but before he could study it further, Emily closed the locker with quiet finality. The second clue lay in her tattoo itself. Under the harsh floodlights of the motor pool, the butterfly ink revealed more than wings. Thin lines cut through the design, barely visible, weaving numbers into the pattern. Coordinates, unit digits, something precise, hidden in plain sight. The soldiers who laughed at her never noticed, but a visiting SEAL leaning against a Humvee caught it one night. His gaze lingered. His expression changed. He didn't say a word, but when Emily noticed his eyes on her arm, she tugged her sleeve down without a sound. The third clue came in the warehouse. A shipment arrived late, crates of weapons fresh off the line. Armorers gathered around, prying lids open, cataloging serials. Emily, clipboard in hand, stepped forward. She rattled off the model, weight, and specs of each rifle before the men even finished unsealing the cases. "Parker," one of them said, staring, "how the hell do you know that?" She just shrugged. "It's on the manifest," she replied, though they all knew the paperwork hadn't even been touched yet. These were not accidents. They were fragments of a life Emily never talked about, buried beneath the surface. The men who mocked her saw only silence and a butterfly. The ones who looked closer saw shadows of something else, something far more dangerous. The inspection came without warning. Late one afternoon, word spread that a lieutenant was making surprise rounds through the motor pool. Soldiers scrambled to make order out of chaos, tightening straps, wiping grease, lining gear in perfect rows. Emily Parker stood quietly at her desk, clipboard at the ready.
The lieutenant's gaze swept the room. His eyes landed on her. "You," he said, pointing. "Private Parker, step forward." The room stilled. Emily obeyed, boots clicking against the concrete floor. The lieutenant picked up an M4 carbine from a nearby rack and held it out. "Your logistics, right? Paperwork, supplies. Let's see what you really know." A murmur rippled through the soldiers. This wasn't a fair test. Everyone knew Parker wasn't combat arms. But Emily didn't hesitate. She accepted the weapon with steady hands. "Disassemble it," the lieutenant ordered. Emily looked at the weapon once, then set it on the table. Without a word, she reached into her pocket and pulled a strip of cloth. She tied it around her eyes, blindfolding herself. Gasps filled the motor pool. Her fingers moved with quiet precision. Bolt, firing pin, extractor. Piece by piece, she laid the weapon out in perfect order. No wasted movement, no hesitation. The clicking of metal against the table was the only sound in the room. In less than 2 minutes, the M4 lay stripped bare before her. The armorer standing nearby folded his arms. "I've seen guys take 5 times that long," he muttered. Emily pulled the blindfold off, blinked once, and began reassembling the weapon. The final click of the magazine echoed like a hammer strike in the silence. When she slid the rifle back across the table, the lieutenant's expression was unreadable. From the back of the room, a voice broke the silence. "How the hell do you know that?" Emily didn't smile. She didn't explain. She just lifted her clipboard again, as if the demonstration had never happened. "It's all in the manual, Sergeant," she said softly. But everyone in that motor pool knew better. Her secret was cracking through, and no one could make sense of it. The convoy rolled into Camp Hawthorne just after dawn, tires grinding against the tarmac, heat already rising from the ground. A Navy SEAL detachment stepped out, disciplined, silent, carrying the weight of operations most would never know. At the front of them walked their commander, a man seasoned by decades of service. Emily Parker stood off to the side, clipboard in hand, sleeves rolled high as always. She was unnoticed, just another figure in tan fatigues. She wrote down tail numbers, checked manifests, and kept her head low. The commander's gaze swept the yard, sharp and searching, and then he froze. His eyes locked on Emily's arm, the butterfly. He stopped walking. The operators behind him halted too, boots falling quiet on the blistering concrete. The commander stepped forward slowly, each movement deliberate, as though he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Emily looked up, startled, but didn't move. Her fingers tightened around her clipboard. Then, without a word, the SEAL commander straightened his shoulders and lifted his hand in a crisp salute. The air shifted instantly. Soldiers nearby froze in place. Their trays, their tools, their words cut short. Silence spread across the yard like a wave. A whisper slipped through the ranks. "Why is he saluting a clerk?" No one dared laugh now. The commander's voice carried low but firm. "You're still with us, Parker?" She gave the smallest nod. And just like that, the truth cracked open. Emily Parker was no ordinary supply clerk. Years earlier, she had served as an embedded intelligence officer on a mission so classified that most records didn't exist. Her call sign was never spoken aloud. Her tattoo was never decoration. That butterfly ink was a mark known only to a handful of men alive, survivors of an operation where Parker's intel had saved dozens of SEALs from certain death. The symbol had been worn in silence by those who had come back, and the commander standing before her had been one of them. He held the salute, and for the first time since she arrived at Camp Hawthorne, every mocking voice fell quiet. The salute hung in the air, unbroken, a moment stretched tight with silence. Then the SEAL commander lowered his hand and turned to the gathered soldiers. His voice carried steady, but weighted with memory. "You think she's just a clerk? You think that tattoo is a joke?" No one answered. No one dared. The commander's gaze swept the formation. "Years ago, in a valley most of you will never hear about, we were trapped, outnumbered, pinned down, minutes from being wiped out. The only reason I'm standing here, the only reason any of us made it home, was her." He pointed to Emily. She stood frozen, caught between humility and dread, her clipboard pressed tight against her chest. She wasn't on the ground with a rifle. She wasn't pulling a trigger, but the intel she fed us, the route she found, the code she cracked, the call she made in the dark, turned the tide. My men lived because of her. A hush fell deeper over the yard. The soldiers who had mocked her in the chow line shifted uncomfortably, shame in their eyes. The commander stepped back toward Emily. He raised his hand again, crisp, sharp, unmistakable. This time, the salute wasn't just his. One by one, the SEAL operators behind him followed. Then the army officers. Then the enlisted soldiers who had once laughed at her tattoo. Boots snapped together. Hands rose to brows. The air electric with respect. Emily's throat tightened. She didn't smile. She didn't break. She returned the salute with a quiet steadiness that shook them all the more. For a heartbeat, hardened warriors saluted the woman they had dismissed. The butterfly ink that had been a target of mockery was now a banner of sacrifice and survival. It was the kind of moment that no one on that base would ever forget. When the salute ended, the yard stayed silent. No one spoke. No one moved, as if breaking the moment would be a kind of disrespect. The SEAL commander lowered his hand. His voice softened. "You've earned more than silence, Parker. They should know who stands among them." Emily shook her head gently. Her words were barely above a whisper. "I'm just doing my job, sir." And that was the end of it. No grand speech, no demand for recognition, just the same quiet discipline she had always shown. From that day forward, no one mocked her. No one joked about the butterfly ink on her arm. The men who had laughed now stood a little straighter when she walked past, their voices quieter, their eyes respectful. In time, stories spread, whispers of what she had done, fragments of truth carried from one